Hello and welcome to The Pulse. The relationship between the media, the government and law enforcement has become increasingly volatile and tense since last year's social unrest, even more so since the enactment of the national security law. Among the incidents that have caused concern are the August police raid on Apple Daily and later the arrest of its owner Jimmy Lai, who is currently remanded pending trial in April. In this instance, he's facing fraud charges, with even more serious charges in the pipeline. There was also the September announcement that the police would stop recognising the press credentials of many journalists. They say they'll only accept accreditation from government-registered outlets and internationally known foreign media. In November, RTHK producer Bao Choi was arrested on charges of making a false statement to obtain vehicle licence information from a public database while investigating the Yuen Long MTR attack. Then came even more recent events at the broadcaster iCable. After a management reshuffle in August, followed by a request for staff to take unpaid leave and the firing of 3 senior engineers, the company sacked a further 40 members of staff with immediate effect, including the entire investigative news team. In protest, the whole China news team resigned. Well, with us to talk about the current media situation are Francis Lee, Director of Chinese University of Hong Kong School of Journalism and Communication, and Tom Grundy, Editor-in-Chief of the Hong Kong Free Press. Can I turn to you first? I mean, you've been observing journalism in Hong Kong for quite some time.
Yes.
Have you ever seen a situation in which the media was so beleaguered, if you like, as it is now?
Well, I think things have changed continually and gradually in the past 20 years. What we know is that, for example, the problem of press freedom has always been there. It has been receding slowly, gradually over time. But yes, I mean, the intensity of what happened, I mean, all the troubles, problems, and, changes in major personnel, massive layoffs, etc. I mean, in terms of how frequently and intensively they occurred in the past few months, it seems to be unprecedented.
The reason I use that word ever is because Hong Kong's colonial history is also marked by long periods under which the media was under control of big companies and other people who were favourable to the colonial government of the day. So, I mean, you could argue that perhaps the situation was even worse then than it is now.
But I guess in every historical period, I mean, there usually would be, in a normal situation, you have a relatively fixed rule of the game, so to speak. And everybody in that period would know how to play the game. So you would have, for example, going back to the past 20 years, before 2019, okay, between 1997 and 2019. Now, we on one hand, we know that Hong Kong's press freedom has been on the decline, right? Its ranking in the Reporters Without Borders or Press Freedom Index has declined from 18 to 70 something in a period of 15 years, right? But in that period, it has been a very gradual change, right? Within any media organization, within the media system at large, I mean, you know how to play the game. There would be a certain degree of freedom allowed within the organizations for reporters to do some critical stories. But yes, there would be issues that probably many media organizations would not want to touch, and so people in that situation, in that game, knows how to play. But I guess what changed in the past few months is that the national security law actually set up a totally new game that no one knows how to play, right? And so basically, right now is in a very short period of time, there are tremendous changes, and people don't know how to react.
Well, let me ask you, Tom Grundy, about that. I mean, you're very much at the front lines of this. What's changed for you and for the Hong Kong Free Press since the introduction of the national security law?
Well, by design, this law is intended to make the media self-censor. There are a lot of passages relating to the media. We've already seen a raid on a newsroom, an RTHK reporter arrested, Jimmy Lai, now sat in prison, and acts of self-censorship with RTHK removing an interview with Nathan Law. We've been set up to try and resist this kind of thing, but when we ask questions about what's allowed, we talk about these moving goalposts, we don't get straight answers. Can we interview a wanted dissident or print the words of a banned slogan or film someone, burning national flag or something like that? we don't get a straight answer. The red lines, are fuzzy, and so it will cause people to overcorrect, self-censor, and arguably that's more powerful than censorship itself. But as far as we've been concerned, we've sought to, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and keep calm and carry on. We're using just encrypted devices now. We've trying to set up backup entities. We've got legal advice, business advice, and more draconian measures like literally chaining our desktop computers, to the desk. But so far, until we're told otherwise, we have not allowed it as yet to, affect our output.
Many people say, actually, that things are going to get worse. There have been, I know this doesn't sound very pleasant, but there have been relatively few arrests of journalists. There's only been, if you like to put it in those terms, one raid on a newsroom. Do you think things are going to get worse?
I think it would be a reasonable expectation, so to speak, right? Things are likely to get worse for a number of reasons. First of all, the national security law, as Tom said, it's very fuzzy and has actually provided the government and the police with tremendous power. And it seems that the government and the police these days have no qualms in using that power to achieve their goals of suppressing dissent or to stabilize, quote unquote, stabilize the society. So it seems to me that the trend is likely to go on. And secondly, the situation for the press is likely to be very, very difficult due to two other reasons. One reason is, of course, business economics, right? The news business itself is in a very difficult situation without all the political troubles, right? With the transformation of digital technologies, with the transformation of the business model, the business for news
is actually traditional media.
Yes, it's difficult anyway. So that adds to the trouble of the news. And then and other additional factor I would say is that the government, of course, these days, as you said, they haven't really arrested that many journalists except Bao Choi and a few others for very, very peculiar reasons. But they are really suppressing the civil society. And if there is no vibrant civil society, the press actually would also be very difficult to work because when the press reports on critical issues, reports on very social political issues, you have to rely on sources from the civil society, right? When the civil society itself is weakening, then the press by itself would be very difficult to provide any many critical and meaningful coverage.
And we don't have a representative of the government here, but I'll put to you what they say.
Yes.
They say the rule of law is intact, freedom of expression remains intact, and that Hong Kong still enjoys a free press.
I think the rule of law. Now, I'm not a legal expert, so it's actually hard for me to comment on that, but I guess many people will also say that by the rule of law, when the government says the rule of law is intact, they basically mean that, they would, just arrest people based on the law and then, let the court judges. But it seems that many people have the perception that the arrests are oftentimes unnecessary. And the court rulings are not always that sensible, so to speak. Okay, I think that's at least what many people would say. And then for freedom of expression, it's actually a very strange thing to me. Unless you say, you have to, basically, when the government says you have freedom of expression, to me, it almost feels like you are saying, I allow you to say this and don't allow you to say that. Because I allow you to say something, then you still have freedom of speech. There are a lot of things people actually don't know whether they are allowed to say anymore, right? So I can't see how, this situation, you can say, this situation still protects freedom of speech.
There's this whole question of economic pressures
right.
on the media. Advertising boycotts for papers or media outlets considered not to be towing the line, etc. Is that ultimately going to be just as effective as official pressure from the government?
Well, I think the two have always been working together. right? Before and after the handover, I mean, the Chinese government could not really exercise direct control of the Hong Kong press. So basically how they tried to influence or tame the Hong Kong press was through ownership control, okay, you know, to have the friendly business people owning Hong Kong media and through advertisers' influence. And it has been quite successful. And with the economic challenge becoming more serious these days, it could be a very effective means because, you know, without resources, even if the certain media organizations can survive, like online media, because, you know, the cost of running online media are relatively low when compared to traditional media. But still, I mean, without a healthy economic, without healthy resources or revenue, it still will be very difficult for media to do the kind of, you know, cost-intensive kind of reporting like investigative journalism and things, and other kinds of in-depth reporting.
This whole business of who the government will allow to work for companies like the Hong Kong Free Press. I mean, you've had an instance of one journalist who's been denied a visa, who was going to come and work with you. Is that, again, actually curtailing the way that you can operate?
Well, this is the bureaucratic terror, I suppose, in that we had a 6-month rigmarole trying to get a work visa for an incoming editor, having not been able to find anyone locally. And inexplicably, we were denied. After a lot of filibustering, you know, we weren't given a reason. And of course, it makes recruitment tougher. It was the third Western journalist to be ousted from the city, but I suppose we're in good company, as the other two were the Financial Times and the New York Times.
I think perhaps if you pull back a bit, you could say, well, you know, for all the things that are going on in Hong Kong, the media situation here is nothing like it is on the mainland.
It's still somewhat different from what the mainland situation looks like. Yes, where you can see there are, of course, a number of reasons. I mean, after all, Hong Kong still has essentially an open information system, right? The internet is still not behind the firewall, right? The Great Firewall. So it's actually very hard for the government to censor all kinds of information flowing around. And Hong Kong tradition, because of its tradition, because of how the media worked in the past 20, 30, 40 years, we still have a group of very, very professional, very energetic journalists trying their best to defend press freedom. I think that's why Hong Kong still is fighting and still struggling, yeah.
And Tom, could I ask you very briefly, finally, do you think that an organisation such as your own will still be around in a couple of years' time?
Wherever we are in the world, and we love Hong Kong, we want to be here, we're going to keep calm and carry on, take one day at a time, and just try and ensure we get the news out. But for sure, HKFP will be around in some form.
Well, Tom Grundy, Francis Lee, thank you very much indeed. And we'll be back after the break. We'll see you then. Welcome back. Following the upsurge of protests last year, frontline reporters and photographers frequently found themselves in conflict with the police force. As a result, the Hong Kong Journalists Association issued a number of statements and also complained to the Commissioner of Police regarding aggressive and obstructive police tactics against journalists. With no sign of improvement in the situation, the association successfully filed a judicial review concerning the legality of the way the police were allegedly obstructing journalistic activities and failing to investigate complaints.
On 19th November, the High Court ruled not only that the Hong Kong police force had breached Article 3 of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights by failing to require officers to display clearly visible identification, but that the Hong Kong government's failure to provide an independent mechanism to handle complaints against the police also breached the human rights law. Under Article 3 of the Bill of Rights, victims of ill treatment by police should be able to identify the officers concerned so they are able to take civil or legal action against them. 2 days later, the Commissioner of Police Chris Tang confirmed that the government will appeal the decision. He said that the force had replaced the unique identification, or UI number, with operational call signs to prevent officers being doxed.
我哋同律政處已經係研究咗個判詞，咁決定咧就會作出一個上訴嘅。咁但係我哋都係會係尊重呢個法庭嘅一啲嘅決定嘅。咁咧喺我哋而家暫時嚟講咧，喺呢個上訴未完成之前咧，我哋暫時係唔會使用呢個行動呼號。
The day after Tang's comments, 2 journalists were stopped and searched by police officers in Siu Sai Wan while on assignment for online media outlet Stand News. The officers demanded that one of them, Joey Kwok, unlock his phone. He refused. They then told him that he could file a complaint against them, but added that people don't trust the IPCC anyway.
嗰晚個警員就走過嚟鼓勵我投訴啦，佢話：反正我而家係好冇禮貌咁樣對待你㗎啦，你中意就去投訴啦。咁反正監警會都唔相信㗎啦。咁我會覺得，哎呀，即係你哋係完全唔驚投訴機制啦，亦都覺得監警會係對警察係冇任何約束力啦。咁佢哋好似有恃無恐咁樣就中意點樣對待我哋就對待市民啊，咁樣係可以好冇禮貌或者好越權都可以咯，我覺得。
In response to our inquiry, the police say they invariably respect press freedom and that they will continue to cooperate with journalists, provided that doing so does not affect the efficacy of police actions. Stand News journalist Ronson Chan is the vice chair of the Hong Kong Journalists Association. He says the High Court's November 19th ruling is a significant victory that holds police accountable for their actions.
I do think it's a significant and vital victory for Journalists Association. After the judgment has been made, every police constables with uniform, they have showing their shoulder badge again, and all the UI number have been shown again. After the judgment, some things have been changed, and we are looking forward to the more and more change to come. And we are very pleased that the Judge Anderson Charles said that this is a very basic request for the Bills of Rights. We do think that this is a very ordinary and very common understanding of the law.
2 days after his most recent encounter with the police, Joey Kwok filed a complaint with the Complaints Against Police Office, or CAPO. Since last November, he has made 5 complaints to CAPO. So far, not a single one has returned a conclusive result.
我識得有啲年輕記者咧，佢哋因為驚警察或者唔相信警察個機制，所以寧願自己受苦都唔會去投訴嘅，都可能唔想回想起嗰一次嘅2次傷害啦，可能理工大學嗰次啦。咁佢哋寧願選擇逃避咗呢件事情，就算數咯。亦都有啲記者可能因為佢個媒體嘅背景啦，亦都唔適合去投訴警察嘅。
After the June of last year, many journalists have suffered from the police violence. For example, we are still trying to find out who should be bulleted out, but the answer is still not clear. Because this case is entering the judicial process, this is not easy to get back the identity.
On 17th November, British policing expert Clifford Stott published a report on the social-psychological dynamics and public perception of police illegitimacy during Hong Kong's 2019 protests.
Are you Hong Kong police? Are you Hong Kong police?
影還影啊！唔好過嚟啊！影還影，唔好再過嚟啊！
Stott was one of 5 international experts who withdrew from the IPCC's Special Advisory Panel last December on the grounds that it lacks independence and its own investigatory powers. We talked to Stott, who is in the UK, via Skype.
Having the capacity to identify an officer creates an environment where that officer is accountable to the law. And that's really, really important in terms of maintaining professionalism and proportionality and legality in the context of policing a crowd event. So I think that both of those rulings are really quite important. Police accountability, independent structures of holding the police to account are cornerstones of what it means to live in a democracy. So, of course, once those things start to be seen to be under threat, so too does the very nature of democracy itself.
Cliver Stott has been researching the policing of protests for decades, including the questions: what turns peaceful crowds violent, and how do riots start? He says many people share a misunderstanding that crowds make people irrational, but that's not necessarily the case.
So our theory is based on the idea that people don't lose rationality. They actually are driven by a sense of who they are collectively, what it means to be a pro-democracy protester in Hong Kong. And what it means to be a pro-democracy protester in Hong Kong changes over time. And one of the primary factors that drive that change psychologically and therefore behaviourally is how the police act towards the crowd. And this is not necessarily, and this is where it gets quite difficult politically, this is not us blaming the police. This is us saying, look, when you want to understand this issue, you have to accept that what happens behaviourally is a function of the way groups interact during crowd events. One of the most important groups in this whole mix were the police, and how they behaved had a fundamental impact on people's psychology.
In his judgment, Judge Anderson Chow pointed out that the complaints against police office cannot be regarded as independent of the force. In his view, the IPCC lacks the independent investigative powers it needs. On the day the judgment was handed down, IPCC Chairman Anthony Leung told the press that he doesn't believe the force hid officer identification details deliberately. However, since the government decided to launch an appeal, he has refused to make further comments.
The question here is also, how long will that court judgment survive? Will it be overruled? What impact will it have? This isn't just whether or not Hong Kong will have an authority that retains accountability for the police with a level of independence that the court is calling for. It's, will Hong Kong survive as a democracy that is under discussion here.